Good morning and welcome. We appreciate everybody being here today as part of our effort to celebrate the ongoing work of the All of Us Researcher Academy. My name is Brian Southwell, and it's been a pleasure to co-lead the All of Us Researcher Academy with Dr. Sula Hood and my other colleagues, both at RTI International and Community Campus Partnerships for Health. We really appreciate you being here today. We've got a great lineup of speakers ready to talk with you about progress that has been made in the past year and progress that's ongoing. And we have exciting news to talk about here with the work of new folks that have joined the team. So what I'm going to do here today is give you a quick overview for those of you that may be new to the Researcher Academy network, talk a little bit about what we are up to. We're going to have an opportunity to hear from two participants in our most recent group. And we're also going to have an opportunity to hear from new representatives from Group 2 of the institutional champions, which have been awarded. So with all that in mind, let's go ahead and first introduce some of the wonderful colleagues that I have a chance to work with every day at RTI International as part of the All of Us Researcher Academy team. There's a wide array of folks who work on this effort. We've got a few of them noted here on the screen. Something that we like to also note are the institutional connections and alumni ties and collaborations that many of our team members have with various HBCUs, which has been really important in the first 2 years of this Researcher Academy effort. The All of Us effort overall is part of an effort to support the National Institutes of Health, and it's been an honor for us to work on that. We also are here today in collaboration with Community Campus Partnerships for Health, who helped to put together this Road Tour event and who are behind the scenes here today. Alan Richmond, Sarita Hannah Boykin, and Virginia Hunter, amongst many others, are working on this effort. And there are many HBCU alumni in that group as well. So we move to the next slide. I'm going to offer you just a quick overview of what the Researcher Academy here is all about, and then we'll get to our additional speakers. So the National Institutes of Health has been working on the All of Us Research Program for a while now. It's a historic effort to ultimately collect data from 1 million or more people living in the United States that will better represent the population of this country than has been the case historically. We're hoping to, through All of Us, speed up health research discoveries and enabling all kinds of individualized healthcare, which is going to benefit everyone. The All of Us Researcher Academy specifically provides training and technical assistance for researchers who are working with data from the All of Us Researcher Workbench, which the Researcher Workbench is a portal through which researchers are able to get access to the All of Us data set. And during this first phase of the All of Us Researcher Academy, we've been directly supporting researchers at historically Black colleges and universities. We're going to have an opportunity to hear a little bit more about that here today. So you move to the next slide. So ultimately, what we're hoping to do with the Researcher Academy is not only to raise awareness of the All of Us research effort, but also to understand how All of Us data might be useful to assist with the research programs ongoing at various institutions around the country. We have already been in the process of creating internships and fellowships and training and workshops for students, for postdocs, for faculty members to help them better understand what's possible and available through the All of Us data set, and also to ultimately be publishing and contributing to academic literature using All of Us data. There are a variety of really exciting partnerships that we can talk about, and we've been learning a lot in this first year and a half or so of existence. Move to the next slide. So something that we have available, which we're really excited about and which we want you to learn more about, are the tuition-free courses that we offer for people who are working in this arena. The institutional champions who have been a part of and a really core part of our effort are some of the folks who take advantage of these courses, but they also are open to people even outside of institutional champions. These courses cover a wide range of topics, many of which have to do with direct engagement with all of us data, trying to figure out how to use the tools which are necessary in order to use the Researcher Workbench, and figuring out how to push the envelope in terms of cutting edge data analysis techniques, but also trying to provide ways for people to do even basic data analysis using the Researcher Workbench with different tips and tricks. There are a wide range of other courses as well. We regularly are making announcements about these. And so as being part of this network that you've opted into here by engaging with our webinar, you're going to start to hear about these short courses, and we hope that you can take advantage of them. They've been a great success so far. Can you move to the next slide? So a core piece of the All of Us Researcher Academy effort has been to work directly with institutional partners around the country. And we've been really excited to do this. This has been really gratifying in a variety of different ways. Last year, the end of last summer, we announced our first 6 institutional champion awardees, all of which have done tremendous work. And we've really been happy to work with them. You're going to hear from representatives from 2 of them today. And now we've recently awarded a second round of institutional champions, and we're going to hear from a couple of those here today as well. This has been a really great effort to give people an opportunity to step away from some of their everyday work to join this network of collaborators and researchers who are working on the All of Us data set. Can you move to the next slide, please? We also offer an internship program that you can read more about in our newsletters that we'll talk about here in just a second. This internship program has been a great success this past summer. We had 6 interns actually doing work with researchers in different institutions to further their understanding of the All of Us data set and to conduct relevant analysis. Move to the next slide, please. Ultimately, you can read more about what we're doing, and this is something I want to really promote, our All of Us Researcher Academy newsletter. This newsletter actually recently won an award for design and for service here, and we are really proud of it. So we're hopeful that everybody on the webinar right now can subscribe. There's a QR code on the screen. We'll also make a link available here, and that's something that we want people to sign up for. You can read all about all the opportunities connected to the Researcher Academy and about many of the individuals who are a part of the Researcher Academy through the newsletter. It's called Connections. With that, I want to move ahead to the next slide, please. And I want to welcome 2 folks who really have been wonderful partners, thus far. These types of efforts we recognize are a matter of people taking time out of their already busy schedules in the service of scholarship, in the service of mentoring. And both the folks from the Group 1 that we're going to hear from today are really, in my mind, exemplars of the kinds of people that really need to be working in our universities, because they themselves have been really models of mentoring, and they've been wonderful collaborators to date. So we're going to hear from Dr. Ford at North Carolina A&T.
Well, greetings from North Carolina A&T State University, and congratulations on becoming All of Us institutional champions. It's a great opportunity and wonderful team at RTI to help you reach your goals. So just a little bit about what we're doing at A&T. We're working on 3 projects looking at the role of social determinants of health as predictors of health outcomes. The first project looks at cardiometabolic health and risk reduction. The research question is, what is the effect of social determinants of health on cardiovascular health and 10-year risk of atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease? So the variables of interest include biomarkers that are reviewed with assessing cardiovascular risk reduction, anthropomorphic measurement variables, race, female, gender, medical medication history, and social determinants of health surveys. We plan to regress the selected social determinants of health variables to develop a predictive model of elevated risk profiles. The second research question is, what is the incidence of heart failure or adverse cardiac events in Black African-American women who are long-term, 5 years or more, survivors of breast cancer? In addition to previously mentioned cardiovascular risk score and social determinants of health variables, We also will assess the history of breast cancer, their TNM status, tumor node metastasis status, type of treatment, length of disease-free survival. And then finally, we are looking at molecular level markers of breast cancer risk and cardiovascular risk. And the research question is, do selected social determinants of health correlate with molecular level distinctions in cancer survivors' cardiovascular health? And the variables of interest in the current cohort bill include many of the previous mentioned variables, but include short read, WGS, and BRCA1 or BRCA2 status. And we anticipate submitting abstracts to American Heart Association scientific sessions and their Epi Lifestyle Conference, as well as the Cardiometabolic Health Congress. And again, welcome to the Institutional Champion family. Have a great time.
We do have the opportunity to hear now from the first of a couple of speakers who are going to represent our second group of Institutional Champion awardees, Dr. Idris here from Morehouse School of Medicine. If we can have him up on the screen, that would be great.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to be able to present some of the work that we're doing with all of us at Morehouse School of Medicine. As was mentioned, my name is Muhammed Idris. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Medicine, as well as an associate director within our Clinical Research Center leading digital transformation, and then finally co-director of a new Center of Excellence on digital health. I'm also the PI for our All of Us Institutional Champions Award. Next slide, please. So in terms of an agenda, I wanted to start off by providing some background context about all of us at Morehouse School of Medicine, and specifically the important role that our institution has played in terms of recruitment and the central role that we played within the Southeast Enrollment Center. I'll then introduce our faculty awardees, as well as some of the projects we've identified, and then finally dig a little bit deeper into one of the projects on lupus nephritis and mental health that I'll be leading. And then I'll conclude with a few key lessons that hopefully others will be able to appreciate as well. Next slide, please. So in terms of the role that Morehouse School of Medicine has played as part of the Southeast Enrollment Center, we're one of now five institutions, along with Emory, University of Miami, University of Florida, and University of Puerto Rico. And here what you see is kind of a breakdown of basically recruitment of groups that have been designated as underrepresented in biomedical research. And one of the things that you'll notice if you look at that bottom column in blue, Morehouse School of Medicine, you see that we're doing significantly well in terms of recruiting particularly underrepresented populations. And so, for example, when it comes to underrepresentation as defined by Ancestry, we're up in the 90th percentile. We're also doing significantly well when it comes to, for example, sexual and gender minorities, as well as education and income as well. So for us, really pursuing this Institutional Champion Award was first and foremost an opportunity to take advantage and continue this work that the institution has done in terms of being able to intentionally recruit and retain folks within the All of Us Researcher program. So next slide. And so our goal was really to identify faculty, particularly junior faculty and postdoctoral trainees who are well positioned given their interests, as well as opportunities for research to take advantage of this. So first I'll introduce our faculty Institutional Champion awardees. Dr. Carmen Dickinson Copeland is a basic and environmental health scientist. Her current research focuses on the identification of molecular biomarkers and socioeconomic and environmental risk factors associated with lead exposure and toxicity amongst children living in rural and urban settings. We also have Dr. Tennille Johnson, who's a geneticist, whose work focuses on health disparities broadly, but specifically identifying and evaluating genetic risk factors, as well as conducting single-cell transcriptomics and transcriptional pathway analyses. Dr. Jamie Hopkins is also an assistant professor within the Community Health and Preventive Medicine Department and is broadly interested in physical activity, obesity, community asset and hazard mapping, and also has broad interests in leveraging digital health, as I'll talk about in a second. We also have Dr. Nicole Mavingiri, who's a postdoc at MSM, where her research is exploring the relationship between the cancer stem cell population in prostate and breast tumors and endocrine and chemotherapeutic resistance and relapse. Dr. Victoria Churchill actually worked at Morehouse School of Medicine, ended up doing her PhD in health communications at Georgia State, and is now back with us as a postdoctoral fellow in the Cancer Health Equity Center. She is interested in applying health communication strategies to develop and deliver targeted and effective messaging to a variety of audiences with the goal of reducing disparities in cancer prevention and treatment. And then finally, we have Dr. Vivian Xu, who's a bioinformatician from Brazil. She's also a postdoc at Morehouse School of Medicine and is doing work on the maternal and fetal immunology and epigenetics, and is interested in the analysis of large biological data and phenotype data sets. Now, one of the things that I wanted to point out is that we started a slide ago with kind of the role that Morehouse School of Medicine has played in recruiting recruiting groups underrepresented in biomedical research. But also, if you look at kind of our intentionality in terms of our recruitment for the Institutional Champion Award, we were very intentional to hire to identify junior faculty with broader interests in leveraging the data set, as well as postdocs. And our group is also intentionally diverse, majority women and of color. Next slide. Awesome. So first here, what I wanted to do is introduce the 3 projects that we've identified that we'll be working on collaboratively. Project 1 is led by Dr. Tanili Johnson. And in this project, we're going to try to determine genetic ancestry in African Americans with type 2 diabetes and type 2 diabetes with diabetic neuropathy. And she'll be supported by Dr. Carmen Dickinson Copeland and Dr. Vivian Xu. Next slide. Our second project moves away from looking purely at the genetics, and one of the things that we were looking to do is actually leverage some of the wearable data that's in there. And so project number 2 is going to be led by Dr. Jamie Hopkins with support from Dr. Victoria Churchill and Nicole Mavingiri. And really in this project, what we want to first start off by doing is dig a little bit deeper into the wearable data that is available on the All of Us Researcher Workbench. Now, one of the lessons that we've learned, as I'll talk about in a second, is that, we often think of, towards the end of the presentation, is that we often think of the All of Us data set as this beautifully curated data set that could possibly be used to answer any question. But as you start digging a little bit deeper, you start to recognize where the limitations are. And as we're thinking about leveraging wearable data for health disparities research, the first thing that we wanted to do was characterize usage of wearables among underrepresented communities, and then take that a step further and look at things like engagement with and attrition in the use of digital health tools, and then hopefully take that a step further and try to model circadian rhythms within that data. Next slide. And then finally, project 3 is looking to assess the relationship between lupus nephritis and mental health. And this is the project that I'll be leading with support from Dr. Priscilla Pimu and Dr. Dana Kajan. So again, you see that we have a diversity of projects here. We have, leads who are faculty, as well as folks who are supporting these projects that include both folks who are funded by the Institutional Champion Award. But again, folks are so excited about the opportunity to contribute to these projects, as well as leverage the All of Us Researcher Workbench. We've also identified other people who weren't funded by the award, but are definitely interested and willing to participate in the development of these projects. Next slide, please. So I wanted to get a little bit deeper on project number 3 that I'll be leading, the project on lupus nephritis, as well as the association with mental health outcomes. And in particular, what I wanted to do is set the context for this, in that this project is part of a larger initiative around the use of digital health and coaching for chronic disease self-management that I'm leading with Dr. Priscilla Pimu, who's an internist, Associate Dean of Clinical Research and the Director of Clinical Research Center at Morehouse School of Medicine. And we've already done work on cardiovascular disease, as well as diabetes self-management education. And now we're looking to apply a lot of our learnings to lupus nephritis, working with the National Association. And the primary research question really is around self-management interventions for addressing mental health concerns among adults living with lupus. And if you look at the literature, number one is that there are actually not too many papers that specifically are looking at the association between lupus and mental health outcomes, despite there being a lot of anecdotal and other evidence suggesting that there is a high prevalence of both anxiety and depression among patients living with lupus. And really, this manifests itself in a variety of different ways. For example, depression may manifest itself as a loss of interest in general activities and responsibilities, among other factors that have been pointed out. And then finally, anxiety having been shown to be associated with physiological changes, including difficulty in breathing and accelerated heart rate. So again, really, this is a part of a broader project trying to look at the association between self-management interventions to address mental health concerns amongst folks living with lupus, but there hasn't been that much work characterizing what mental health looks like amongst this population, leveraging data, a very rich data set like all of us. And so what I wanted to do in the next few slides is actually kind of take you step by step in terms of how we're approaching this, because there were a lot of lessons that we learned in how one should actually be leveraging the public data browser. And then from that, the hierarchy of medical concepts. And then from that, the cohort builder, in order to create a data set that has a sufficient sample size for the analyses that are of interest. So if we go to the next slide, the first thing that we did was actually pull up the public data browser. And we pulled up the public data browser, we typed in lupus nephritis because that's specifically what we were interested in. And what we found was that while there were some domains within the EHR, some conditions within the EHR that mentioned that specifically the sample size actually was significantly smaller. And so what we did was then actually look up just lupus. And what we got on the right-hand side is basically counts for various medical concepts around that use the term lupus. But again, these are individual counts and don't really take into account that some of these categories are actually subcategories of other concepts. So go to the next slide, please. So here what we can see is a breakdown in terms of some of the demographics. If we're looking at that highest level concept of lupus, so you do get some information. For example, you can look at a breakdown for this concept, specifically sex assigned at birth as well as age. But we see also on the right-hand side that it actually it captures a lot of different things. And so one of the things that we identified early on is that we couldn't look at lupus nephritis specifically, that we might want to use this higher level category with about 4,000 indications, but that there's specifically drug-induced systemic lupus that we wanted to make sure to exclude from that. So if you go to the next slide. And really where, actually one slide back. And so really, the public data browser is an awesome tool, but it's not really until you get into the cohort builder where you're actually able to see whether or not you're able to collect the data that you're interested in. And so you can see on the left-hand side, we were trying to create a cohort around those who were identified as having lupus in their EHR domain. And so we used that top level kind of medical concept where we found about 3,964 counts, unique counts. Of course, we wanted to exclude those with drug-induced lupus, so we excluded those participants. And here on the right-hand side, we have a breakdown in terms of race, as well as race and age at the time of data reporting. And so we're able to create a data set of about 3,809 people, whereas if we looked at the first medical concept that we were trying to do, just lupus nephritis, we had something in the order of about 300 to 400 participants. Now, one thing I wanted to add really quickly before moving on is that it was recommended to us by our amazing All of Us coaches that there might be other aspects of the data set where we might be able to pull this information. So for example, within All of Us, there's survey data where specifically you're asked a question about medication that you are on or have previously been on related to a lupus diagnosis, or whether or not, for example, you have a family history of lupus as well. And so I think there really is an opportunity here to be creative. And if we're training folks to be able to leverage this amazing resource, we really need to train people to how to be creative in how we go about creating these cohorts. Because again, for certain research questions, and if we're too specific in how we define kind of the concepts and the parts of the data set that we're looking at, we're actually going to end up with a much smaller sample than we would otherwise be able to leverage. Next slide. And so what I wanted to end on was, this kind of some of the lessons that we've learned. And the first lesson that we learned is that All of Us is an amazing resource. Beyond it being an amazing resource, the tools that have been developed on the Researcher Workbench were really developed intentionally. And I think with the right training, those particularly early stage investigators and trainees, this is an excellent resource for being able to generate that preliminary data that could basically be the foundation for future funding. But you really have to be clear about what your research question is and leverage the tools that are available to understand whether or not the data exists for your very specific research question. And the more specific you are, the less likely you will be able to find the data that exists. Now, I think it's actually in many ways a good thing to be able to identify that early and being able to identify where there might be a gap in data collection. And again, that might, what's the word I'm looking for? Not incentivize, but inspire additional data collection and resources. The second thing we learned is that the public data browser is pretty limited in that it gives you kind of a false sense of what is available. And really, you're only able to look at any one of those medical concepts as well as the counts within them. It's really, the power is within the cohort builder to identify what size sample can I actually be able to piece together. But in order to leverage that cohort building, clinical domain expertise is essential. And so, for example, I worked, trying to do the research on my own to identify, specific medical concepts and how they might fit together really was futile in terms of its effort. But working with Dr. Pimu, who herself is an internist and works with patients with lupus, she was very clearly able to say, add this, don't add that. And myself having the technical training to be able to leverage the cohort builder was very easily able to build that cohort. Now, everything that we've done up until this point is just getting the data. And the reality is that getting the data is only half of the battle. Once you get the data, you create a data set, you spin up on, as you can see on the right-hand side, what's called a notebook. But in order to leverage the notebook and to understand how the notebook actually works, you do need some methodological and data science expertise for the actual analysis. And so you'll see in the screenshot in the back, you actually see the query that there's actually a SQL database where the data is being pulled. Now, the thing that I found interesting is that the data is not being pulled being pulled from multiple tables within a database. And it doesn't actually create a very nice data set for you. You actually need to write the code in order to combine the different data sets for analysis. And that requires, again, an understanding of both the data, but then also some sort of technical competency in R or Python to be able to just do the data pre-processing necessary to do the analyses. And then, of course, depending on what analyses you're doing, you want to, of course, make sure that the code and everything that you're doing is itself efficient. Because while you get $300 in credits, if you're not writing good code, then you can easily use up that resource. And if you're doing more computationally intensive analyses, the cost of both the compute and the storage can add up very quickly, as you can see on the top right-hand side. And so, for example, persistent disk storage is about $5 a month. And so you can imagine running a computationally intensive analysis, then you leave it on the All of Us Researcher Workbench. It's still charging you despite you not actually doing any additional analysis, again, for that storage. So again, getting the data is only half the battle. I think it's really important that we are training folks to get the methodological and the data science expertise for analysis. And with that, I think this is the reason why the All of Us Institutional Champion Award has been really awesome for us, because we are able to get people onboarded, both in terms of how to leverage the capabilities to get the data, but then also the training necessary to actually do the analysis. And so with that, I think this is my last slide. Thank you so much. And I look forward to any feedback.
In the interest of time, we're going to pivot here, and we want to welcome on screen one of our Group 1 leaders, Dr. Shideke from Tuskegee University, to also greet folks, and then we are going going to move to the second presentation we have from Group 2. I want to acknowledge we've had some technical difficulties here with this webinar. Fortunately, it seems like everything went well with Dr. Idris's presentation, which was really the one of the substantive highlights of the webinar. So it's more important to hear him than me. But we'll go ahead and transition here. Welcome, Dr. Shideki, onto the screen for a brief hello and welcome from Group 1. Thank you so much for being here today, Dr. Shideki.
Thank you so much. Yes, I want to congratulate the schools in Cohort 2 who are part of Cohort 1. We learned a lot, very much from trying to get involved in how to access and work on the Researcher Workbench. The learning curve for the courses were steep for us. So for those of you that are familiar with R and Python, of course, those might not be the case for you. But the coaches were very helpful with the office hours. And so a number of our students really told me they learned a lot. We are still active on the Researcher Workbench. At least one faculty is pivoting to gain fellowship with the AMA head and is working quite well there. One of our students is now in graduate school and credited the experience that he gained from working with us on the Researcher Workbench. We had 3 researchers working there to what actually helped him to gain additional interest in wanting to pursue bioinformatics. So I want to congratulate you and tell you to get ready to take advantage of all these opportunities that will be given to you. Again, welcome and wish you the best of luck.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Shideki. And something I want to actively express is both our appreciation for your leadership during this last year. And I also want to open an invitation for collaboration from everybody that's on the webinar currently and our Group 2 members to think about possibilities for efforts to cooperate and to connect with scholars at Tuskegee who have learned a tremendous amount and who we hope are going to continue to be a really active part of our network. So thank you again so much for that. It's been an honor to work with you. Yeah. And so now, great, thank you. And so we're going to move to another representative from Group 2 here, Shaw University. Dr. Floyd is going to offer a little bit about the work that her team is doing. And then we have some announcements with regards to the Academy that we'll try to get to here before the top of the hour. So Dr. Floyd, the stage is yours.
Awesome. I assume that everyone can hear me, and as soon as my slides appear, we will get started. Again, my name is Dr. Leah Floyd. I am currently a research associate at Shaw University. I am the lead PI on this project. I'm working with a team that includes other faculty at Shaw University as well as a student researcher. So my team consists of Dr. Eric Butler, who is primarily responsible for running the data analysis. He has a considerable amount of experience utilizing Python. So he's a tremendous asset for our project. We currently have one student, Miss Samira Briscoe, and Samira is learning Python. So she worked very closely with Dr. Butler and Dr. Dorothy Brown, who has expertise in health disparities, health equity research, is also a member of our team. We are in the process of hiring more student research assistants to help with this very important project that focuses on better understanding the relationship between cannabis or marijuana use and suicidal behavior, while taking into consideration differences across race, ethnicity, and some contextual mediators and moderators. Next slide, please. So for today, in this brief 15 minutes that I have with you, I want to help you become, I want to share with you the project idea and what we're specifically focused on during the first 3 or 4 months of this project. So today's talk, we will talk about the trends in cannabis use, as well as the epidemiology of suicidal behavior. I will provide a very brief overview of the literature, what we currently know about cannabis use and suicidal behavior. This will be followed by the research question, and then I will talk a little bit about the planned analysis and some of our preliminary findings. Next slide. So next slide, please. The epidemiology of marijuana use. Before I talk about the individual behaviors as it relates to marijuana use, I think it's important that we talk a little bit about social factors that may be contributing to the increases in marijuana use that we will discuss briefly. So in terms of considering social factors, I think it's important to talk a little bit about the legalization of cannabis use. And let me just stop to say, I will use the terms cannabis and marijuana interchangeably, although they are not exactly synonymous. But as of April 2023, 38 states, 4 territories, and the District of Columbia had passed legislation that allows for the medical use of cannabis products. Non-medical or recreational adult use has been legalized in 22 states, 2 territories, as well as the District of Columbia. But it's important to note that the FDA has not approved the cannabis plant for any medical use. There are some products that contain cannabis that have been regulated by the FDA to treat specific disorders such as seizures associated with rare epilepsy, such as to treat nausea associated with chemotherapy. But the cannabis plant itself has not been legalized for medical use, is not considered safe by the FDA as of yet. Moreover, at the federal level, cannabis remains classified as a Schedule I substance. And this essentially means that cannabis is considered to have a high potential for dependency and no acceptable medical use. It's also currently still a federal offense to distribute cannabis at the federal level. Next slide, please. So marijuana use is widespread in the United States, and as it has increased in popularity, the demand has increased. And what we've also recognized is that the makeup of marijuana that is available in the United States has changed considerably over the last 20 years. Let me draw your attention to the red line. And this line is basically demonstrating how the levels of THC in marijuana has increased since 1995. So in 1995, the percentage of THC in marijuana that was available or seized in the United States by the DEA was about 4%. As of 2019, this has jumped to 14%. And some data even suggests that we're at over 20% with regards to the amount of THC in marijuana. And THC, let me note that THC is the psychoactive ingredient in marijuana that is responsible for the high, the feelings of euphoria, relaxation. If you also notice, you'll see that CBD has decreased. So CBD is also one of the chemical compounds in marijuana that we hear a lot about. And some argue that this particular compound has significant medicinal value. But if you look at this particular line graph, you will see that the levels of CBD have decreased significantly. And so currently, we are not really sure about the implication with regards to health. How does this these high levels of THC impact mental health specifically. And so my research focuses on better understanding the relationship between the current marijuana that is available with high levels of THC, lower levels of CBD, and how it impacts mental health, and specifically suicidal behavior. Next slide. So when we consider who is using, first we look at cannabis use disorders or marijuana use disorders. And as you can see, 5.8% of individuals over the age of 12 were diagnosed with a cannabis use disorder in 2020. Persons between the ages of 18 to 25 have the highest rates of marijuana use disorders or addiction, right? Some people believe that marijuana use is not addictive, but there is a diagnosis for cannabis use or marijuana use disorders in the DSM-5. So again, persons between the ages of 18 and 25 have the highest rates of cannabis use disorders currently. Next slide. Among this group of individuals, 18 to 25, the annual marijuana use rate is 40%, and daily marijuana use is at about 26%. So about 26% of persons between the ages of 18 and 25 report using marijuana every day. There are also stark differences across race ethnicity. For example, African American emerging adults, their daily marijuana use rate is approximately 8.7. This is compared to 7.6 for whites and 5.3 for Hispanic Americans. African American emerging adults also, again, have a higher proportion of cannabis use disorders. So this particular group, African American emerging adults, the cannabis use disorder rate is about 5.6% compared to 2.7 for Hispanics, 2.7 for whites, and 2.9% for Hispanics. Next slide. So it appears that among persons between the ages of 18 and 25, African Americans are more likely or have a greater odds of daily, weekly, as well as monthly marijuana use, and are more likely to experience cannabis use disorders, which is why I feel like it's important to really consider how race ethnicity plays out when we consider the association between marijuana use and suicidal behavior. Next slide. With regards to suicidal behavior, next slide. Suicidal behavior, let me offer up a couple of terms. So when we talk about suicide is defined as death caused by self-directed injurious behavior with intent to die. A suicide attempt is a non-fatal, self-directed, potentially injurious behavior with intent to die as a result of the behavior. And then suicidal ideation refers to thoughts, thinking about, considering, or planning suicide. And for this project, we focus on suicidal ideation. Next slide, please. National data. This slide depicts current national trends in suicidal behavior. And let me draw your attention to the green bar in this bar chart because it represents 18 to 25-year-olds. Similar to marijuana use behaviors, persons between the ages of 18 to 25 have the highest rates of suicidal thoughts at 13%, have the highest rates of planning a suicide at 4.9%, and have a highest rate of attempted suicide at 2.7%. So it appears that the age range 18 to 25 or emerging adults are a very high risk group. Next slide, please. Currently, suicide is the second leading cause of death among persons between the ages of 15 and 24. And again, as we saw with marijuana use behaviors, there seems to be differences in suicidal behavior. Current data indicates that suicide attempts among Black individuals are higher than the suicide attempts among white individuals. And this is particularly interesting because historically, African Americans or Blacks have had lower rates of suicide. And yes, they continue to have lower rates of suicide, but we see these disturbing increases in suicidal behavior among this group. Next slide. So, for example, recent data indicates that between 2013 and 2019, the suicide rate of Black persons between 15 and 24 years of age rose by 47% for males and 59% for females. In addition, the prevalence rate of suicidal ideation increased from 6.3 in 2009 to 10.3 in 2019 among African Americans between 18 and 25 years of age. Next slide. So while suicide does not have a single cause, and it is a very complex behavior, there are numerous factors that have been associated with an increased risk for suicidal behavior. Among these factors are substance use, and specifically cannabis use. And current data indicates that cannabis use is a risk factor for suicidal behavior, whether we're talking about cannabis use disorders, whether we're talking about early onset of cannabis use, that is initiating marijuana use before the age of 16, which we know is a risk factor. And another measure that has been shown to be associated with suicidal behavior is the frequency of cannabis use. Next slide. So in the literature, again, we have found that early onset marijuana use is associated with suicidal behavior. Gabi and colleagues 2019 looked at a number of studies and found that adolescent cannabis use predicts the development of depression as well as suicidal ideation and suicide attempts in young adulthood. Another study that looked at twins found that the frequency of marijuana was associated with suicidal ideation. So the twin who used marijuana frequently was more likely to report suicidal ideation compared to their identical twin who used marijuana less frequently. There also seems to be some data that seems to indicate that there are racial and ethnic differences in the association between marijuana use or cannabis use and suicidal behavior. So Kelly and colleagues, in their study that was published in 2021, found that African American adults reported higher odds of co-occurring suicidal ideation and cannabis use disorder, and a higher odds of co-occurring cannabis use disorder and suicidal attempts compared to their white adult counterparts. Next slide. So the purpose of this study is twofold. First, we want to quantify the strength of the relationship between marijuana use and thoughts of suicide among emerging adults. The hypothesis is marijuana use to cope will be positively associated with having thoughts of suicide. The second research question or focus is to determine if the strength of the marijuana use suicidal ideation relationship differs across racial and ethnic groups. We hypothesize that the strength of the relationship between marijuana use to cope and suicidal ideation will vary by race, ethnicity. Next slide, please. So in order to address our research questions, we're utilizing the COVID-19 participant experience COPE survey. So this survey was essentially administered during the COVID-19 pandemic, which was an unprecedented experience for the world, which was very stressful, which caused high levels of anxiety. Folks were experiencing tremendous amounts of loneliness and social isolation, as well as it also had detrimental effects we're finding on mental health. So we decided to look specifically at the relationship between cannabis use during this period and thoughts of suicide. So we looked at one specific question. In the past month, to cope with social distancing and isolation, are you doing any of the following? And a number of different situations were given, and one included using cannabis or marijuana. The next item, suicidal ideation, was measured with the question, over the last 2 weeks, how often have you been bothered by the following problem? Thoughts that you would be better off dead or hurting yourself in some way. And participants indicated the extent to which they had these thoughts. For the purposes of data analysis, we created 2 groups, those who had thoughts of suicide and those who had no thoughts of suicide, not at all. And then we grouped the other 3, several days, more than half the days, and nearly every day, into one group. So we had no thoughts versus thoughts of suicide. Next slide, please. And so to examine this relationship, to quantify this relationship, we are going to use hierarchical logistic regression analysis, in which the outcome variable will be suicidal ideation, yes, no. The main predictor will be marijuana use to cope, and we will control for the potential effects of age, sex, education, as well as depression. We're including depression because depression is one of the strongest predictors of suicide. Next slide. So we conducted some preliminary analysis. In the first analysis, we looked at rates of marijuana use to cope across race ethnicity. And we included African Americans, European Americans or white Americans, and then Asian Americans. And we focused on these specific groups because our analysis indicated that these were the racial group or racial ethnic groups that had a substantial or relatively good number of respondents. And so when we look at marijuana use to cope, we see that African Americans, about 48% of African Americans indicated that they had used marijuana use to deal with social isolation during the pandemic. This is compared to about 31% of white Americans and about 28% of Asian Americans. When we look at thoughts of suicide across racial ethnic groups, we see that 19% of Blacks, 15% of whites, and about 16% of Asian Americans ethnicity, particularly with regards to marijuana use to cope. Next slide, please. In this slide, I am presenting the data from looking at specifically at 18 to 25-year-olds versus 26 to 44-year-olds. And what we see here is that 42% of those between the ages of 18 to 25 reported marijuana use to cope, compared to 31% of those between the ages of 26 and 44. We also see that emerging adults, persons 18 to 25, a greater percentage, or what appears to be greater, we don't know if this is statistically significant, it remains to be seen, but 21% reported thoughts of suicide compared to 15%. Next slide. So from this analysis, we have more questions that we need to ask before we move forward with engaging in the hierarchical linear logistic regression. So we will continue to clean the data. We will address issues around missing data, but very important also is to determine whether or not we will have enough power to look specifically at 18 to 25-year-olds. Because as you recall, when we were going over the epidemiology and the literature, we know that this group, 18 to 25-year-olds, seem to be at increased risk. So we want to look specifically at this group if we have enough power. Right now, we are not 100% convinced that we have enough power. So we may expand it to look at 18 to 34-year-olds and just refer to it as young adults. Another major decision that we must address is whether or not to drop Asians from the analysis, given the relatively small number of Asians in the sample. And we also are considering looking at just persons who identify as males and females versus others, because we have such a small number of individuals who identify as others. So again, before we run the logistic regression models, we must clean the data, deal with missing data, and make some decisions about who we're going to include in these final models. Next. So we want to address this problem primarily because it has significant public health implications with regards to policy as well as prevention. As we are seeing these increases in the levels of THC, as we grapple with the high levels of marijuana use among persons between the ages of 18 and 25, as well as increasing rates of suicide, we need to better understand the relationship between this high potency marijuana and mental health, and specifically suicide. This will have implications for the legalization, as more states are considering legalizing marijuana, whether it's for medical use or for recreational use. It also has implication for designing suicide prevention interventions. It also has implications for treatment, specifically as it relates to African Americans, a group that has not been studied substantially as it relates to suicide, a group that has very high rates of marijuana use, cannabis use disorders, and a group that we know is currently experiencing increases in suicidal behavior. So we need to have studies that focus on understanding risk factors associated with these increases in suicidal behavior among this group of individuals who have historically had lower rates of suicide. And so with that being said, I need more funding. So if there are any funding agencies here today, please reach out to me or send me your contact information so I can reach out to you as we pursue more funding to dig deeper into this problem. Thank you.
I'm going to encourage people to sign up for the newsletter, and I do want to encourage people. We are actively in the field with a survey right now, and we want to encourage people to sign up for that as well. So if you are currently located at an HBCU, please do use the link to sign up for that survey. We've got a couple of courses upcoming here, and we're hopeful that people can take advantage of those as well. So we're going to leave a few of those slides on screen for people to engage with those QR codes. I want to thank everybody for your time today, and we look forward to connecting with people in all kinds of ways in the near future. Please feel free to reach out through the All of Us Researcher Academy email. And thanks again on behalf of RTI International and Community Campus Partnerships for Health. We appreciate your time today, and thank you very much.